Hey, weird question. You ever thought about how big some of these game worlds actually are? Well, I was playing through Majora's Mask recently, and it took me a second to think about it, but if Link can do a lot in half a day, especially on the first cycle still, even though that's moving at like double speed, does that make Hyrule Field bigger or smaller in comparison? Weird question, but hear me out. Just watch this. So, if Hyrule Field or Termina feel larger or smaller to you, I want you to consider this is what, that same amount of time in Tears of the Kingdom or Breath of the Wild would look like, sped up to match. Anyways, with the Zelda segment of that all taken care of, now I'd like to talk about Pokemon. Effectively, what I wanted to talk about was when I was younger, I had the Prima Games guide for Pokemon Diamond and Pearl. So, they had an entire map of the region and stuff laid out, overlaid with, an outline of the region, if I recall correctly. I'll have something similar to it on the video screen right now. But effectively, it made me think about that when I was playing through, Scarlet and Violet. Because I grew up playing the games with well, not the games, but Diamond and Pearl with the anime, I always had an image of what the towns look like versus what was displayed on screen in my head. And the earlier comparison between Majora's Mask and Ocarina of Time helped that. It made me feel like what I was being shown on screen was simply what was needed for the gameplay, or to signify that, yeah, there is a lot here, or something like that, rather than literally every piece and part of the said town. And it really wasn't until Castelia, I think I might have said that right, city in Black and White, where it genuinely felt like that. Even though the city was I think, basically a rake in design, being one bar across and then having three pathways up, if that's even the right amount, that the cities actually felt huge. And there was more than the raw size of it that made it feel that way. The amount of NPCs walking up and down the street that you couldn't actually talk to, but the few ones that were stopped that you could, it all really assisted in making the town feel like it was huge. And I know I said town, but that's just like hard coding my brain. I know it's a city. And there are tons of other games that make this effect work really well. I mean, just like a Persona 5 and, The World Ends With You, both Neo and the original, the maps in those areas might be, like, actually pretty small, but if it weren't for those NPCs wandering, they would definitely feel a lot more empty. In fact, they'd be empty because those kind of things convey a sense of, life in an area. You can't have a city and, have no one in it. Or rather, you could, but I don't feel that's what Pokemon was aiming for, with this. It reminds me of those images of, empty cities and things like that. The types of stuff you'd see associated with liminal spaces. Like, it's definitely not the case here because they're trying to portray these areas as lively. But when you're running through an area that's supposed to be like the central hub for an area, or rather the region in this case, it's kind of hard to believe that there would only be this many people around there with that many buildings. Sure, it's easy to say that, oh, they might all be out because of, the entire plot of the game going on, people hitting out to go find their personal treasures. But at the same time, you really don't see enough people in this game that would ever lead you to believe this place could, be fully populated. That is, unless literally everyone in the region was living here. Which, that's more than far-fetched. So, yeah, sure, the game is getting that sense of scale across really well, but the issue is, it doesn't really matter because there's no one there. If I see a city that's huge, and there's no one really there, it feels empty. Which seems kind of like weird to say, but I more so mean, you can show me an area that's supposed to be depicted as huge, but unless there's an equal amount of people there, it's always going to feel like it's either empty or damn near deserted. Somewhere like this, it's a really big place, but again, because of the low population density, it doesn't feel that big. And I know that's a hardware limitation issue, but at the same time, yikes. Like, it might sound a bit weird to say, but I really did appreciate loading zones in games. It really helped get that size of, like, scale conveyed really well, which I'll be talking about with my next example. But we aren't there yet. Right now, I'm still gonna keep focusing on this, because, again, while the towns feel empty, outside of them, with, like, how many Pokemon are always around, some of these areas feel genuinely populated. It's a nice change. Some are even so populated that it's hard to, like, move around without accidentally running into a Pokemon just by chance. Which, considering how they portray the world in, the anime intros and stuff like that, it's really fitting. But again, whenever the human settlements are, about as post-apocalyptic Pokemon, not really a thought I want to have in the middle of this. Anyways, whenever the human settlements are basically as deserted as the routes are, like, populated, it really hits this weird sense of, I'm not sure what the word I would use specifically for it is, but something about it feels a little bit eerie. Like, again, while the routes feel properly populated, they've got, like, those scarce spaces where you won't really encounter much of anything before you get to those spots where it'd be incredibly common, at least, like, in universe, to find, damn near basically a roadblock of Pokemon wandering across there, which, makes it easy to believe they've got to use different forms of transportation. You just can't take a car through here because you're probably going to be fixing it up afterwards if you even get through the situation in the first place. I mean, look at this. That's a lot of Pokemon in one road. I can't imagine, being on my way down there and then, an entire herd of Skidoo kind of start wandering across the road. I mean, what do you do against that? You just battle them all and make them run away or something? Oh, that'd probably be like a Pokemon crime or something. I don't know what the laws in the world are. But it just gets to a point where some areas feel naturally populated, which in turn makes the less naturally populated areas feel more unnaturally unpopulated, if that makes any sense. Like, if I see a, reasonably populated small town and I walk like 2 miles over to the nearest city, and suddenly there are like only 3 people in it, I'm going to be weirded the hell out. And that's kind of the situation, these areas bring to mind. Because I would expect to see a lot more people here, but, you run around, you maybe see like 4 or 5 at a time, if even. And it really kind of feels off. Because I've been to some bigger areas, at least around the area I live in, and at no point during the day has it ever been like this empty. Even at nighttime, you'll see like plenty of people walking around. So seeing somewhere like this deserted, I don't know. It feels kind of like I'm playing Silent Hill 1, but like instead of, enemies, it's people. And there's a lot less fog. Does that make any sense? Or does that like make everything make less sense by extension? I don't really care at this point. But it's like this weird mix-up. I know there's probably a word for it, but until I figure that out, I'm probably just gonna be sitting here scratching my brain over this. Oh man. Anyways, so, leading into that next example about loading zones and stuff like that, while, people might not really like them because of the fact that, oh hey, it breaks up the game, it makes it feel like less connected. I personally feel that some areas in games, at least like the transitional areas between spots, shouldn't really need to be covered. Like, I don't need to see every footstep I take in a game and stuff like that, and the Monster Hunter series is pretty perfect at illustrating that point. When you go into an area and you're sitting at that loading screen for a while, that was edited by the way, you get to see areas like, I don't know, those views that really make an area pop out. Every time I play Monster Hunter Tri, I run out here, and I love this spot. Like, every time I hear that jingle in my head, it really makes me feel like the deserted island is a huge place, and it really feels like one too. The rest of the areas feel like, well, in some cases, feel barely connected, but it really makes you feel like you're moving around a really large place, and only in certain areas do things really open up, or are certain areas are only really able to be taken in. It's like if you walk around the woods or something. Every place might look like woods to someone who's uninitiated, but eventually you might find that place that's like a clearing or something, or, something that stands out. And in the case of this game, a lot of these areas can be seen as that, because, you don't know the exact path you took. And sometimes the exact path you take is so out there that you wouldn't really expect it to be a path at all. When you're playing Monster Hunter Generations, you might not get to take the entire pathway up to the White Academy hub, but the fact you can see the airships over there and, see how far off it is, do you really want to walk that distance just to interact with it? I mean, like, I would personally be down because, I'm all for filler shit like that. I like it whenever things scratch that, like, brain itch of me feeling like I can reasonably tell, yeah, that's a long way. But at the same time, when you get to areas like the Frozen Seaway from Monster Hunter 4 in Generations in this case, you can see areas that you would go to quite a distance off. So in a case like this, you can see, like, so much of the Frozen Seaway, and, the key part of this area is your red ship. That's what you might have come here on, that might be your base camp. I'm not really sure, but it's a nice little headcanon for me that that's the ship you get here on. So when you enter the next area and you look over your shoulder and you can see that ship so far away, as well as like ice flows getting dragged down into this thing, it really hits a spot of, man, I feel like if this was like an entire path in a game that I had to run every time I just wanted to get to an area where a monster might be, if even, it would be pretty dragged out. But at the same time, just taking a look around these spots really tells you that if you can recognize one spot from a different one, that there is some insane distance between a lot of these areas, that it'd be kind of a pain in the ass to have to, like, path out if you're putting it in a game that was modeled in the same style as, like, Rolled and Rise. Again, I would still probably end up playing that, but at the same time, at some point it just gets to a point where, why? Because if you look down, you know, you can see the previous two areas you came from. It's nothing crazy, they're in lower detail, but you can see how far up it is from there. It's not insanely far, but it's still enough to separate into its own chunk of map. You can see the ship and everything, but you're also getting closer to that, you know, cloud in the sky. So if you hit into the next area, and you keep moving towards it, it eventually gets to a point that you can't even see where you came from anymore. You know it's only like a few screens away, which is only going to take like maybe a minute 30 to like get to where you came from, if even. But at the same time, because of those like huge ass spaces between, you can kind of interpret that, man, character has been moving for a long time in universe, but not like out of universe, if that makes any sense. It's like how a lot of games have, you know, the 24-hour cycle and all that fun stuff without it being in real time. If you look at, you know, an early example, Breath of the Wild and Ocarina of Time, Majora's Mask, all that fun stuff, they've each got their own like day-night cycles with their own amounts of time that are like kept in between those. For Breath of the Wild, you've got like, you know, 24 minutes being 24 hours and all that shit. But even though, again, it might not feel like a long time to us, if I had to, you know, spend an entire day running, sprinting, swinging swords at bokoblins, and climbing mountainsides, I'd probably be exhausted at some point. Not just at some point, but around the time you expect me to climb up half a mountain. I don't know how that man does it, but props to him. And while I know I earlier called it a key point, I know a more accurate word for it would have been point of interest, which there are lots of those in these maps, and I really dig that. Like, you can't see where you came from on this map. You have a vague idea of it, that being, you know, ruins, where the base camp is. And, you know, that vague idea is enough. But at the same time, when you step out into this field and stuff like this, and all you can see is, like, the mountains overhead, the blue sky, all that fun stuff, and then, you know, empty plain, which you can walk in to move into the next area and stuff like that. At least on my side, it really makes me wonder, how far did our hunter just run to get to the spot? Like, you've got those like small bit of ruins over there that you can see that I keep scrolling past, but it's not really a clear indicator of anything that's actually in the area, because when you hit to the second area from this place, which it's not actually area 2, I believe, you can't really see those same like two structures anywhere else, because as you've moved on out here, I mean, that might be them, but as you've moved on out here, there have been more structures being, you know, shown off and stuff like that. You can't see the same ruins that you came from, but moving between those two spots, it really makes me think about, again, how far did I run just to get to the spot? How long would that take to portray in normal, well, today's normal standard of gameplay? Does that like 3-second loading screen accurately, like, well, no it doesn't, but does that 3-second loading screen really show off the fact that you might have just run, I don't know, maybe 3 or 4 miles to get to a spot? That's the type of stuff that really makes my brain go, wow, I love thinking about this type of shit while I play this game. It's probably something that, you know, I get a little bit too wrapped up in, as this video is possibly showing, but it's still the type of thing that I love to think about, because it's part of that world. The point of interest in this case is the mountain peaks. You move towards them, you move into them, you move a little bit past them, but that's the highest point of the map. It's somewhere you'll be continuously moving towards, and there are lots of areas that allow you to move in towards it. I mean, you get to a spot like this, and this is basically putting you halfway up the mountain. You can choose to go down, or you can head up to the peak. In this case, we're going to go down, and, you know, run towards another area. But this is just to get across how, you know, high up that shit is. You can't specifically see the top, you can't see the area you're going to be going to, just, you know, remember in your face, and eventually, you know, you getting knocked down. But that's not the important part. The important part is, it really sells, you know, that you aren't moving a long distance. In the same way that I feel like Ocarina of Time's Hyrule Field, if it was accurately rendered, would be huge. In-game, it takes an entire full half day to get across, which, if you look at a game like, you know, in the same series, like Tears of the Kingdom and Breath of the Wild, you know how far you can get just running in a straight line for half a day. You can get from the Great Plateau straight to Hyrule Castle. It feels like a long time in-game because, you know, the areas are appropriately stretched out, but again, in Ocarina of Time's case, it only takes you like a full minute to get there, and that's if you're running. If you're running and rolling, or, you know, just running backwards, you'll probably get there much faster. But it doesn't feel like it takes that long because of the fact that you aren't exposed to, like, you know, a longer day-night cycle. If you were, the area would likely take a lot longer to get to. Just like how getting this mountain peak would probably take a lot longer than it does in-game here. You can always kind of see the other areas around you, but you never have a true idea of how far between they are. Because otherwise, these map sizes would be absolutely fucking bonkers. I've got 2 more Monster Hunter examples before I move on to, you know, potentially the final point of the video. And with this, we're going to be using, I believe the map was called the Flood Forest. I can't remember off the top of my head. It probably split at the beginning of this clip. But I'm a little bit too stupid to, you know, head back and take a look at that. In this case, you can see that giant skeleton with the water leaking out of it. And this is by far one of my favorite points of interest in a Monster Hunter map. Why is that? It's because you can see that same skeleton, bits of it, all throughout the map. It gives you a massive sense of how big the creature in question is. We've seen some big creatures, we fight some big creatures, but that's a different kind of big. This is a multi-map spawning, well, spread monster. Actually being able to take that thing down would be something that feels like an impossible task in game. Delamdur is huge, and I don't know if I even said that right, but fighting that thing, it really feels like you're up against something massive. Fighting Jin Moran, it feels like you're up against something massive. Neither of those things compare to, you know, what you're looking at here. Because while you continue running up towards this, you get closer and closer to that waterfall. You get closer and closer to the inside of that thing's skeleton. And you can still see different parts of its bones all throughout these areas. So when you enter an area like this and you can see that, oh hey, I'm inside of this thing now. If you saw this thing with like actual meat on its bones, what would that look like? But not only that, what kind of creature was this? It makes you really think about like the size of the map, because you get to see one point of it throughout so many places, which we'll definitely be talking about. Because, you know, again, I feel like this is the best example of this, because there are lots of different areas in this map that are all interconnected through this creature. And I personally think that's really badass. Like, I don't know how else to say that. There's probably a more articulate, verbose way, but I've put this video off for like a week because there was a storm and I thought I lost a lot of progress on it. And now I kind of want to just get it out to start working on something else, but at the same time, it's still a subject I'm incredibly interested in. Because, I mean, again, this thing was probably a snake. You can see like different parts of its spine all throughout the spot. Vertebra, I don't know what you'd want to call it. But being able to see stuff like that and accurately get a comparison of like how big you are in comparison to that, it actively makes me sit there and go, well, I'm speechless right now thinking about it, and that's something. It's, again, really, really small stuff that doesn't matter to a lot of people, but for someone like me it's just stuff I think is superbly cool. It's one of the things that really got me into Monster Hunter. I started with 3, I went back, played Dose in 1, I didn't get very far in 1, I completed the, well, like, I think I got up to like 6 star, or something close to that, in the PSP version of Dose, and then, like, after playing those 2, and then, like, with Monster Hunter 4 coming out on 3DS, that was the first Monster game I was actively able to complete, because while I got decently far in 3, I never really, like, beat the game whenever I first had it on 3DS, because my shoulder buttons didn't work, and I was using Sword and Shield, so, like, I couldn't use half of what I wanted to do. That being, you know, actually guarding attacks, which meant DPS checks like the Seydus were extremely hard to get through. And once I finally did get through them, I felt like a god gamer. That has essentially nothing to do with what I'm talking about now, but again, it's that type of cool little stuff in games that helps people get into them in the first place. Being able to see, you know, that thing skeleton from this far away. Again, this is a completely different part of the map, and if other Monster Hunter maps have shown us anything at this point, there's rarely any clear indication of how far away any of these points actually are. So having something like, I don't know, a creature skeleton work as a way to tell, you know, how far away from certain areas you actually are in a game, not only does that make the universe feel more crazy than it probably has any right to be, it really, like, it ignites that part of, at least, like, my imagination that makes me really love these game universes. And it's gonna take me a second to figure out how to, like, exit the small little area in the recording, so mind that. I'm pretty sure the recording time for this is like 3 in the morning, so that's not a good thing. But it's one of those things that, again, can really make people latch onto something and go, wow, that's incredible. Running around to an area, you know, this is probably the last one in the Eclipse that I have for this area alone, and still being able to see, like, parts of its tail as you get this far. That's finally something, like, reasonably sized that you've probably, like, well, not reasonably sized, considering that thing's, like, one of those small rib-looking things is literally probably the size of, like, I don't know, a Rathalos or Rathian's, like, head to the end of their tail. But that's not what's important. What's important is that's something around your size category. You might be able to take on one of those ribs. Maybe, like, 2 of them, tops. But again, that kind of thing makes this area feel so fucking huge. And I've said that like 90 times, but again, I really wish I was more articulate. But holy crap, I just love it. I kind of messed up earlier because I'm figuring out I have like another set of clips before like I reach the last one. But this one's for the Jurassic Frontier, which is another area with, you know, no real indicator for how far in you're going. I think that, like, huge tree might count, actually, now that I'm looking at it. I think that's the first time I've actually seen it on the map. But, if that's not it, then, you know, get ready for this. Sure, the areas are huge, but you can see those Laranoth, or what I think are Laranoth, way out in the distance. They're like little pixels at this point. But stuff like that, again, helps sell the distance. So if that was the area you were looking at and you run down here and you can start seeing more of them, it makes you feel like some of these areas are more connected than, you know, previous maps might have been. You can't really see your base camp, at least I don't think so, from where you just ran down to. But stuff like that, and like when you progress into the next area from it, really make, you know, it feel like you move quite a bit of distance just to see some of these places that you were previously looking at. It's nothing fancy, especially by today's standards. Some people straight up don't like it whenever things don't feel like properly connected. I'm definitely not one of those people, but while I can see where they come from, it's one of the things I, well, can't personally agree with. I don't have to see the entire trip my character makes for it to be something that I can mentally believe they made. Whenever a world feels too big for its own good, without there being much, it hits a pitfall that I'm usually not really happy about. Like, let's see here, Twilight Princess Hyrule Field. There are a few cool things that happen in it, but like, it's one of those things that feels big for the sake of being big, to show off, hey, here's how strong our thing is, rather than, hey, here's a good look at, how big the world is and stuff like that. And, I don't know, something about that just feels off. Because, again, while there are a few nice things that happen out there, if anytime you're just running across it instead of teleporting for some reason, you're gonna feel like you're holding an analog stick forward for, like, maybe 4 or 5 minutes without anything happening besides, Kagurax dive bombing you and trying to, like, attack you, or Roblins, riding by and shooting at you. I don't think they do that outside of, like, a few events, but yeah, I don't know. I can just hear the arrow sound effect already in my head. But, digressing from that, when you get to an area like this and you can see those plant stalks all looking up, and you can see, like, this entire cliffside coming off this tree that I think might have been that, thing we were looking at in the first area of the map. There's a lot to take in about this spot. And even more to take in when you leap down below. Under normal circumstances, your hunter probably wouldn't be surviving that fall. But being all the way down here and, being able to look up to some extent at the sky and see those stalks that you previously saw rising so far up that, like, cliffside, the game might want you to believe, oh hey, that's either the exact path you jumped off of, or oh hey, your hunter, like, descended it rather than leaping all the way down it. Either one's believable to me. It sells that sense of scale of the world really well. You don't get to see a lot, but again, if you run through the woods in most cases, while there might be a few creatures you run into and stuff like that, or, if any of you actually take the time to hunt in real life, there are going to be quite a few things out there, but not all of them are going to be openly, out and about. They're going to hear you running around, and they're probably going to, think, hey, something's out there, maybe I'm not going to, get involved with that thing. They're cautious. So, only seeing, like, 4 or 5 creatures and, maybe 3 or 4 things you can actually identify out in the wild as useful things feels right. It's an opposite feeling to, the emptiness that I felt in some of the areas in Pokemon Scarlet and Violet. These areas are a lot smaller, but that small size makes things more densely packed. I don't have to worry about running all the way between places and, basically encountering nothing whenever I'm playing this game, and I can just take 5 steps to the right, enter a loading zone, and basically get, like, an entire picture in my head about, like, what kind of place I might have journeyed to. It's really neat. The last area I want to talk about before I move on to our final example of how it can kind of help and hurt something is the Ruined Pinnacle. It's an area that's depicted as super high up. There's not much else to it. But that height is something that's you could consider the point of interest in this. How far up does this Ruined Pinnacle go? And as you progress through the different parts of the map, you start to figure that out. It's something small, but I really like the... I'm not even sure if there is any environmental storytelling, but at least to myself, it really does feel like it. I don't know how big this area is. I don't know what it looked like when it was actually populated, because clearly there was someone else who used to live here. You can tell by the architecture, that's just not natural. There are some more natural parts of this, but it's not really sure if those were there before, or if it's just a result of, this place falling into decay. It's stuff that whenever I'm sitting here playing this game, I think about and I go, what did this area look like in its prime? How long did it take to get like this? Those small questions start to like build up in my head because, again, this area is really high up. There's not anything really said about it. None of these areas really get like lore or details thrown in about them that I'm really aware of. I know there are areas of Monster Hunter that do, like Castle Shrade and stuff like that. Potentially Ingle Island too. But for places like this, you get what you get. It's really cool looking at, you know, some of these places and thinking about what it would be like if there was ever a game that explored this type of stuff. I'd personally love it. And like I said, that peak is something I would definitely consider the main point of interest for this map. You can see it from quite a few places. You can see how high up into the sky it stretches. But until you actually get up there, you've got no idea what you're dealing with. So taking your time to make your way up there, run into these areas while I'm pretty sure my friends were skipping during this recording, you start to see like weird environmental phenomena. Like, I'm not exactly sure what I would call that. It really reminds me of, you know, the jet streams from Sonic Riders as a series, if that makes any sense, that you would make whenever drifting. It's like climbing into the eye of a tornado. You know, it's probably not a good idea, but I'm sure everyone's kind of curious as to what it looks like inside the eye of a storm. And this definitely feels like that. It gets to a point where you're so high up there that you can't even see the bottom anymore. You can't get a clear look at the clouds below you. Just the swirling ones around you before, you know, you hit into this eventual vortex. And then when you do reach the top, you'd think, oh, hey, it's nighttime, but there's the sun. And even better, there's the moon. Do you have any idea how high up you are now? Because here's a hint. If you take a look down, or even at just around yourself, you start to realize that you basically might be on the edge of the atmosphere. And that thing about environmental storytelling, there's stuff like this that's always going to give you like some vague idea to start making something up about the area. You know, this is an area that was also introduced with, I'm forgetting his name, Mr. Rocket Dragon. But the fact that you can clearly see, you know, the clouds below you now, but not like obscure. You can see small parts of the storm still, but like for the most part, weather no longer matters up here. If there was ever a Pokemon Emerald remake that, you know, went into the type of detail that, I don't know, you might have seen, well, what I think a Pokemon remake of a 1-to-1 size remake would be, so like accurately depicting the size and scale, I think this is kind of what the tower you find Rayquaza in would be like. You'd kind of look around and it'd be dead quiet. There wouldn't really be anything but that dragon looking at you. And I dig that. So, you saw that, right? The Timony Group is something that is later in the game basically shown to be absolutely massive, but you can see the top of it right there. You can see where that demon fell from, and you can definitely hear it smack the ground. Now, you might think, oh, what's this got to do with the earlier example, right? Well, there's a cutscene that, you know, takes place a few missions after this. It's personally one of my favorite, but the entire thing is, we've seen how long it takes for something to hit the bottom of, you know, well, rather, just the ground from up here, right? It took that big demon maybe like 2-3 seconds to slam into the ground. So gamers, here's a question. Why does this entire scene play out whenever, unless this tower has been expanding into the sky, it's like the day goes on, why doesn't Dante, you know, just kind of pancake immediately instead of having enough time to, run down and do this entire action sequence. Why does the scene look like this instead of this? Well, for one, clearly, rule of cool takes, like, first priority in all cases. But, another thing, it just wouldn't be the same. Even though we can see, how far up the community grew here is, another thing is that, in other cutscenes from the top of there, here's what it looks like. So, given that they've already shown in-game, just how high up it actually is, as opposed to what the in-game model would lead you to believe, the actual scale of the distance, in the same way that Monster Hunter would show you, a small icon on the map, or like a small model of something, only for you to, progress through a loading zone, and that thing be positively massive in comparison. You can see so much of the city from the top of the tower. So later in the game, whenever Dante decides, he's going to take a leap off of there and do a few cool things on the way down, even though it should look like the previous clip, according to models, it's believable like this. You can tell that this is the intended height of it. Now, if DMC 3 ends up getting a remake at some point, which fingers crossed on that, having it be a case of getting rid of set loading zones in order to make, the location feel more complete, it feel kind of weird, given we're never really shown just how much and how many empty filler rooms there might be in the Timid Grew. Like, that entire railway sequence, that's pretty big. You're moving for quite a long time there, but we're never really told if we're actually moving to a location or, it's just staying going there through some little demonic energy BS that Dante's not really going anywhere until he gets rid of said demons. We're not given a clear look into the actual sheer size and scale of, but when we take a look at stuff like this, it really makes you wonder, how far underground was that thing? And I know that demonic energy, as well as demon magic in general, can always have like those weird space-time warping things, as we're shown in this exact same game, with certain areas on the demonic realm side of things. This is also supposed to be something that connects them, so having areas within it that, actually channel those effects doesn't seem like something way too out of the realm of possibility, at least to me. So here's a fun little comparison we're going to make to the earlier two clips I showed from Tears of the Kingdom, Breath of the Wild, Majora's Mask, and Ocarina of Time. How long would it take Dante to reach the halfway point in real time compared to the demon that fell off of it? Let's find out, gamers. Now, that's more than a little ridiculous, considering that thing takes essentially half a second to reach down there, and I pretty much just matched that length up, the length of it falling halfway down to Dante getting nommed in the air. The video says the duration was like 5 seconds and 17 nanoseconds, all that fun stuff, milliseconds, I don't fucking know. But effectively, the thought of it taking Dante like 5 actual seconds to get down there is whenever it starts getting the power scalar territory about people being like FTL, all that fun stuff. And again, while I'm not really the type of person who would be talking there, despite, the shit I talk about being just as out there, it's definitely one of those things that would, if I was hyper into that, I would go, yeah, I can believe Dante was doing that, but it also means that, like, if the demons were able to move that quickly and, Lady was fighting her way through those at the same time, that she would have to be about, close to Dante's level despite the entire boss battle and, everything in established lore leading you to believe otherwise, which, that's its own little thing, but we're not talking about that. Effectively, the point I'm trying to communicate is like how old RPGs would show you, your character in an overworld, and it would be the same size as like a map or a town or anything like that. They might take up the same amount of space. It's incredibly easy for me to believe in a lot of these cases that what we're seeing is only specifically what we need to get an idea of what the world around us is, rather than it taking in literally everything, because otherwise, things would be a bit spacious. The Fire Emblem games have been doing more and more about this perception in my head, because with Awakening, it would go from like, the battle screen, zoom in, turns black, all that fun stuff, but the addition of forts were the first thing that made me go, oh hey, because, well, it's not the first thing, but it was more like, hey, this fort, it looks small from the outside, but it's got an entire, like, map area inside of it. So later hitting into Fates and having it, like, zoom directly in on where the location's happening to give a more accurate representation of what's actually happening there. And then moving into Fire Emblem, holy crap, 3 houses. With the ability to zoom in to a point where you can actively see, like, the accurate size of your characters and stuff on the map, in comparison to the large swaths of units and stuff like that, the battalions, it really makes the old games potentially feel huge in comparison because of the fact that you're fighting on, like, occasionally entire continents as you move across them. It might just be a battle between Marth and some, like, nameless random enemy, but the thing is, it's very easy with, like, the knowledge of what's going on in these games now to imagine instead of it just being, like, a person moving across this entire continent in like half their turn, well, their full turn, running into another person, and there only being like, I don't know, maybe 15 units on both sides, that it could just be the leading commanders of like battalions facing off with each other. Sure, it is again a one-on-one between you and this like nameless enemy, but it's very easy for someone like me to imagine that while it might be a one-on-one, there are other people there fighting and stuff like that. So these continental-sized maps aren't just, full of empty space, but lots of stuff happening between them. It's why whenever you occasionally run into the village map on those, not the village map, but like the token for a village, and you interact with it, why it feels like you're moving across somewhere much further. It's really cool stuff, and it's something, again, I hold dear to me. And I think about stuff like that whenever I'm playing other types of games too, like the early example with Pokemon and stuff like that. We might be seeing like this small town, but as we've been shown in the anime and stuff like this, even though you could go, I don't think anyone's going to contest you if you call it non-canon. It's very easy to believe that, like, in the case of a lot of these areas, what they're showing you simply isn't the whole picture. And I kind of like it better that way. Because at least then, whenever an area feels small but densely packed, it feels like it's the correct size relative, like, to what we're being shown. Otherwise, the area just ends up feeling way too big with nothing really there. You look at the map for Termina and Hyrule Warriors, it seems pretty small in comparison to what you get in the game. But then you go on to play said game, and it can take a decent amount of time to actually get anywhere. Anyways, that's pretty much it for the video. This thing is about to hit like 50 minutes, and I'm really not trying to do that, so adios.